Today, we're tackling a massive, incredibly complex, but absolutely crucial topic for understanding world politics. I mean, if you glance at the news, you literally see headlines every single day about border clashes, separatist movements, and sectarian violence. But today, we're not just reading those headlines. We are going to decode the hype-free mechanics behind them. We're looking at the anatomy of ethnic conflict. We'll explore the foundational concepts, the root causes, and the actual academic theories that explain why all this global friction happens in the first place. By mapping this out, we're going to get a much clearer understanding of the hidden forces shaping our world.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for today. We've got 4 main sections. First, defining ethnic conflict. Second, 5 theories of violence. Third, real-world conflict triggers. And finally, Section 4, the mechanics of conflict. Moving right into Section 1, defining ethnic conflict, or, as we like to call it, the foundation of the undefinable. You know, pinning down exactly what ethnic means in global politics is incredibly hard. Honestly, there really isn't a single universally accepted definition that perfectly captures every single conflict out there. But to ground ourselves, let's look at the etymology. The English word ethnic evolves directly from the ancient Greek word ethnos, which simply means nation. So fundamentally, at its core, we're talking about national conflicts. But in practice, these conflicts usually show up as separatist movements or demands for autonomy within an already existing country. Think about the movements for Gorkhaland or Bodoland in India. Those are classic examples where a group is seeking regional autonomy under the umbrella of their shared ethnic identity.
What's really fascinating to me is how these shared traits actually play out in the real world. Usually an ethnic conflict involves a group that shares things like a common language, religion, customs, territory, or even ethnic continuity. For example, look at the Kurds. They live spread across vastly different areas of Iraq, Iran, Turkey, and Syria, but they still share a common language, food, and social beliefs. They have a really powerful continuity. But then contrast that with the Muhajir movement in Pakistan. The Muhajirs are Muslims who migrated from India around the time of partition. They actually don't have racial continuity with one another. They come from totally different backgrounds. Yet their shared history of migration allowed them to form a highly distinct political class. It just shows how flexible, yet completely binding these traits can be.
All right, let's shift gears to Section 2, 5 Theories of Violence. This is really about the psychology behind the friction.
Now, as we get into these academic theories, we aren't going to treat them like dry, boring textbook lessons. Think of them more like psychological lenses to view human behavior. And to really grasp the scope here, I want you to absorb this number, 283. This comes from the Minorities at Risk, or MAR project. Researchers didn't just look at a handful of little skirmishes. They studied a staggering 283 minority conflicts globally. 283. That absolutely highlights the massive global scale of this issue. We aren't looking at isolated incidents here. We are analyzing a massive, widespread human phenomenon. So let's map out the first 3 theories. First up is all ports contact theory. It basically says that if a minority group faces long-term prejudice from a larger neighbor, kind of like the Baloch movement in Pakistan, struggle eventually becomes inevitable. Next, we have social identity theory. Here, Dr. Amartya Sen describes an identity crisis. What happens when an individual or a smaller group is basically forced to surrender to a larger collective identity? Well, violence spikes. Think about the intense sectarian tensions in Syria or Yemen. Finally, Gur's instrumental theory argues that, based on that massive 283 conflict study, there is no single overriding cause. Instead, things like unequal development and a lack of local representation are the real practical instruments driving the violence. Continuing right along with our final 2 theories, Srinivasan's acculturation theory really focuses on cultural dominance. Through everyday social interaction, one group becomes completely terrified of the cultural dominance of a larger group and they fear their own cultural erasure. Or, flip it around, a group demands its culture be recognized as the one true original culture. And finally, there's globalization theory. Theorists point out that since the end of the Cold War, the rapid pace of globalization, massive demographic shifts, and the heavy strategic footprint of American military hegemony have triggered some deep defensive reactions. Groups feel incredibly threatened by the demographic and economic changes arriving right at their doorstep, which sparks racial or ethnic violence as a form of pushback. Moving right along to Section 3, real-world conflict triggers. Let's look at these catalysts in action. Okay. So we've looked at the psychology. Now let's see what actually strikes the match in the real world. A really crucial starting point is understanding the difference in the ultimate goals of these struggles. On one hand, we have nationalist struggles. This is fundamentally about fighting to leave a system entirely, just complete independence. A prime example would be the East Timorese movement fighting for independence from Indonesia, or your classic anti-colonial struggles. But then, on the other hand, we have subnationalist struggles. These groups aren't necessarily trying to break away to form a brand new nation. They're actually fighting to radically change the existing system from within. The Maoist movements scattered across Latin America fit perfectly into this category.
Beyond just the structural goals, there are some incredibly practical catalysts that set these conflicts off. Underdevelopment? That routinely sparks violence, and we've seen this extensively in sub-Saharan and Central Africa. What about ideological clashes? Think of Cold War communism spanning Vietnam and Cuba, or the push for Salafi Islam in West Asia. And of course, there's mass migration. Sudden, massive demographic shifts create immediate, localized friction. We've seen this with the influx of Syrian refugees in Europe, the absolutely tragic Rohingya crisis, and even historical linguistic tensions with the French population in places like Quebec or Belgium.
And this brilliantly illustrates the real-world impact of Srinivasan's acculturation theory we just talked about. Cultural dominance is a huge trigger. When a local population feels culturally devalued by a dominant administrating class, resentment absolutely boils over. The source research specifically points to Baluchistan. That's a massive region where historically, many administrators came from Punjabi or Sindhi backgrounds, which created a deep fear of cultural devaluation among the Baloch people. Similarly, scholars point to forced demographic distortion in the Palestine movement as a core driver of conflict. It essentially blends religious, cultural, and territorial erasure into a highly volatile mix.
But you know, sometimes the root cause actually has nothing to do with culture at all. It's just pure economics. Enter narco-terrorism. The raw, violent struggle for control over insanely lucrative drug trade routes is frequently disguised to the public as an ethnic conflict. Whether we're talking about cartels in Colombia, vast networks in Southeast Asia's Golden Triangle, or smuggling operations along the Pakistan-Afghanistan border, raw economic motives and the pursuit of wealth are very often intentionally ethnicized by leaders. It's basically a strategy to recruit fighters and mask their true financial objectives.
All right, moving to our final section, Section 4, the mechanics of conflict. Let's look at how this all actually operates.
So how do these conflicts actually survive in the shadows for decades? Well, the answer is they operate a lot like corporations or even states themselves. Step 1, they are highly organized. Spontaneous riots eventually fade, but prolonged conflicts, they require serious, heavy structure. Step 2, they absolutely require political support. This is vital. Without internal or external political backing, a movement just can't move forward. They need funding, they need weapons, and they need safe havens. Step 3, they operate with very specific, tangible goals. And honestly, sometimes these goals are dual purpose. Like the stated public goal might be establishing an independent state, but the operational goal running quietly in the background is the highly organized smuggling of oil and weapons just to fund the leadership.
And this brings us to a pretty harsh reality of international relations. These conflicts are routinely used as foreign policy instruments. Superpowers and regional powers intentionally leverage these localized ethnic frictions to achieve their own broader geopolitical objectives. It's just a factual, neutral observation of modern statecraft. For example, during the Syrian conflict, the United States pragmatically utilized Kurdish forces to drive out ISIS. Or look at Yemen. The localized devastation there is widely analyzed as a massive proxy dominance battle between regional heavyweights Iran and Saudi Arabia. Essentially, the local fighters are the ones bleeding, while the external sponsors play a global chess match.
Which leads us directly to this really profound observation from the research. Mostly, international support or invisible forces work behind such conflicts. These movements rarely, if ever, exist in a vacuum. A perfect example of this is the fallout from leadership vacuums. When a long-standing strongman falls, think about someone like Hosni Mubarak in Egypt, that sudden massive vacuum of power opens the door wide for highly organized, sometimes invisible forces to just step right in, organize, and use violence to establish a brand new order.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a question to ponder. The next time you read a headline about some localized ethnic skirmish, I want you to ask yourself, beyond the shared language, beyond the cultural differences, and beyond the historical grievances presented on the surface, who is really pulling the strings behind the world's most localized conflicts? Thank you so much for exploring the true anatomy of